Welcome everyone to the inaugural episode of the Singapore Reads, a conversational series where we invite young Singaporeans from different faiths to share a book where they found something in it that resonates with the values that have attributed to building Singapore, the multicultural and multi-religious nation that she is today. My name is Liana. I'm the host for today, and I'm very happy that today I have two distinguished guests, Ustaz Khalid Rafi and also Raj. The whole thing about this idea of Singaporeans is also an inspiration where, due to the pandemic, where we are not really able to travel to different countries, and in fact, because Singaporeans, we do love traveling, but in this context, what's better than travel to other places by books? So today, I would like to give the opportunity to Raj and also Ustaz Khalid to introduce themselves before they share the book of their choice. So firstly, Raj, can you introduce yourselves, please?
So hi everyone, my name is Shukul Raj Kumar. I'm a Hindu, and I've actually been volunteering with the Hindu Center as a teacher for their Balagurukulam program, wherein we engage with youths and teach them about Hinduism. I'm still new to the interfaith scene. I've only done this for about 1 to 2 years, but still, I've actually been very privileged and honored to be a moderator in many different events that have come up, where we actually invited a lot of different religious leaders and stuff to give their view and perspectives on things like, the institution of marriage from multi-religious perspectives and all that. So that's my introduction.
Thank you so much, Raj. Of course, we look forward to hear more of your inputs later. Can we move on to Ustaz Khalid to introduce yourself?
Greetings, everyone. My name is Muhammad Khalid Rafi. I'm currently the research executive in Masjid Wat Tanjung. I think my involvement in the interreligious scene would actually goes back, I think, a few years back when I was in the docent in Harmony Center as well. But prior to that, I have been doing so on a personal capacity. So I remembered one of the most unforgettable ones is talk by AMP, where they invited me for an open conversations about jihad. So we have the venerable there, and we have the seminarian there, and that was actually quite eye-opening for me.
Thank you so much, Ustaz. Okay, now you're making us very curious. What are the conversations that you had for for that program? Thank you so much, Ustaz Khalid, for that brief introduction. Now we move on to the next segment, which is the book sharing. So I would like to let Raj to introduce your book of choice and also your reflection about the book.
The book that I've chosen is actually called The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari by Robin S. Sharma. Very briefly, it's actually the story of a very wealthy, amazing, wonderful lawyer called Julian, who's, I think, middle-aged and really, enjoying the peak of success in life. He has all his desires fulfilled. He's so capable and resourceful. But something very tragic happens with him. And in this process, he realizes that all the material wealth that he has accumulated thus far couldn't really help him with this crisis. And it really opens up his eyes to the fact that there is actually a spiritual side to life that he may have missed out entirely in his journey. And he proceeds to India to actually seek enlightenment and lessons. And having been trained as a monk there, he comes back to impart these lessons to his younger colleague. And what really stood out to me when I was reading this book is that there are so many beautiful metaphors used in terms of spiritual guidance. Now, I personally feel that material and spiritual go side by side, they go hand in hand. And where material fulfillment is the wings, spiritual fulfillment is the fuel. So if we want to proceed ahead, we need to have both the wings and the fuel, and of course, our eyes set on the right direction. And the gem that I really want to share is this particular quote: Success cannot be pursued, success ensues. It flows as the unintended byproducts of efforts concentrated in the direction of a worthy cause. So, this gem really stood out to me because I am deeply grateful for the Singapore that we live in as a combination, as a sum of the efforts of so many different organizations, stakeholders, entities, policymakers, who have all come together with a vision that they wanted for Singapore in terms of a particular form of success. And they worked day and night tirelessly to actually make this happen. So, IRO itself, Interreligious Organization, Harmony Center, grassroots organizations that we have, they have built so much of rapport with the people, and they have been diligently and patiently engaging in contributions, even if validation was not always there. This is something that we really should bear in mind, in the sense that sometimes we focus so much on the main goal that we forget that it's actually the sum of smaller efforts, the sum of the people that we are working with, that really create a difference in the quality and the product that comes as a sum of our efforts.
Thank you so much, Raj. I think that was very profound, especially if you look into the situation that we are currently in right now. It is always a struggle in trying to balance both. I think that there was one quote from the book that resonates to what you have mentioned from that book itself. It mentions that success on the outside means nothing unless you have success within. And there's a huge difference between well-being and being well off. And I thought it resonates very well with when you talk about the idea of concentrated efforts. But now let us move and allow Ustad Khalid to share his book of choice and his gems for today. Ustad Khalid, please.
On my part, I find this book, Piagam Madinah, right? So this is a book originally written in Malay, quite interestingly. Konstitusi tertulis pertama di dunia by H. Zainal Abidin Ahmad. This actually talks about the Madinah Charter, or in Arabic we know it as Dustur Madinah. And it is the first constitution ever written that incorporates both religion and politics. And this constitution establishes rights and obligations of the people of Medina, which is known as the Ansar, and those who migrated with the Prophet, which is known as the Muhajirins, with the Jewish tribes of Medina. As they go along their journey, as they grow together with the coexistence and cooperations between them, especially among the Muslims, Jews, Christians, and the pagans. And these charters actually can be seen as an example for resolving disputes where peace and pluralism were achieved not through violence, but rather through respect, love, tolerance, and peaceful means. Many lessons can be drawn from the charter actually, which talks about religious pluralism, our contemporary world. And especially today, in current times, you'll find that many people are grappling in trying to find solutions to inter-religious conflicts and tensions. So I find that the Medina Charter can be a useful guide to have immediate conflicts in the world today that are driven by politics, economics, and religious ideology. One more interesting thing that I find in this book is that as I read through, I find that it touched on the good traits or the necessary traits of a good leader. I shall just boil it down into three. First, you need to be a good leader would have to be visionary. Second, they would have to be civic minded. And third, they have to be someone who's bestowed with wisdom as well. So I guess that's the sharing that I could have for today.
Thank you, Ustad Khalid. I think what particularly interesting about this Madinah Charter, it came out in a situation where it was a period of contestation of power and the build of empire in those periods. Yet, amidst of that trend, then, that there is this Madinah Charter that sort of makes you rethink the shift of this whole idea of leadership, right? Whether a true leadership prioritizes just on the idea of invasion, or is it more of building up that involves both the authority and also the people? And hence it becomes more of a state rather than a state that focusing more on a top-down power structure, for example. So I thought that was like very interesting and hope to discuss more on that with you. So now what I'm going to do is to open up the conversation where we can share a little bit more and perhaps to elaborate a little bit more from both sides. But firstly, I'd like to have a question for you, Raj, because earlier you mentioned about like this idea of concerted efforts. And this reminds me, I think there was probably about two months back, there was an article that says in this time, it is very necessary for Singapore to reflect and adopt this idea of Singapore together, where the government and the citizens come together to pursue a common cause and also a social cause. And I find it very hopeful on that. And also, I think this idea of coming together, at least to my personal experience and understanding, it's not something new because we have always had this idea of gotong royong in Singapore, that we continuously work on it in good times and also in our times of struggle. And also when we see during the pandemic that, for example, there's a lot of effort trying to emphasize and show appreciation towards the frontliners. But I was also wondering, do you think that at this moment there has already been enough efforts to give credits to everyone? Or there should be perhaps a lot more thing that we can do better in ensuring that collectively the different parts of the citizens and also the non-citizens who contribute to Singapore can feel that they make a difference in this country?
I think, in my view, when we talk about the concentrated efforts of all these stakeholders who have been part of even helping Singapore work through this COVID crisis, there may have been a lot of efforts to give that appreciation, but perhaps more could be done in terms of changing the way in which they are appreciated. Like for frontline workers and staff, maybe just not clapping for them or so, maybe just giving them a day off or something like that. Just some time to spend with their family. So I think in focusing on the material form of validation, we might have not really emphasized so much on the spiritual form of validation. That is in terms of connecting their emotions, creating a space for that emotional well-being to kind of manifest. So of course, I mean, we are doing our level best to give material ways of validating. You know, we say thank you to the frontline workers and stuff, but maybe as in what they might really need is a sort of just spending that time with their family, spending time alone, or just having that time to recuperate, you know, emotionally from the traumas that they might be facing in dealing with a patient itself during this crisis. But definitely, I do agree with your point in that we should still continue to validate. So I think what we should be doing is, you know, concerted efforts, you know, continue to validate in this case. At the same time, let's look towards utilizing proper ways of validating them rather than just choosing a particular way that might be easy to adopt. Yeah, that kind of thing. So I think, I mean, at least in my experience as a undergraduate in public policy, I feel that sometimes imposing a particular policy itself may not be as effective as compared to really understanding the emotional, the spiritual aspects of certain stuff. That human connection and rapport is something that we might often forget or we might not focus so much on in the process. And that is really what creates the difference.
Thank you, Raj. I thought some of the points that you mentioned just now sort of like resonate to the earlier point that Ustad Khalid mentioned, because Ustad Khalid mentioned about, you know, the good traits of a leadership is being visionary and also civic minded and also have this wisdom. It sort of like remind me, there's this saying, to be wise, sometimes you are not necessarily right. And I thought that that's a very deep statement because, you know, wisdom also comes with a lot of humility. Perhaps, Ustad Khalid, if you want to expand a little bit on your point earlier.
I think the point that, especially in whatever situations that we are in, a great leader would have to have certain common traits. I think it cuts across time. So this is where you find that even as how it's been mentioned in the book, you will find that leaders would have to think of the future. They have to be visionary. They have to respond as opposed to react. And this is where you will find that, for example, in the Medina Charter, you will find that the Prophet, he understands about the concept of religious freedom. He understands about the security of the community. And he understands that people of different groups, of different communities, of different culture and faith beliefs, if they have a common goal, they are actually able to work with one another and without discriminations, without oppression. Right? So it gives space and understanding for both the majority and minority citizens to enjoy their rights, especially pertaining to areas of their concern, be it in their faith, in the socio-political circumstances, or to other unique needs. So this common aim is the one that truly build one united people who feel comfortable and safe with each other. And I think that's an extremely good trait in a leader. Second, a leader would have to be civic minded. They need to care for the community. And this is why you will find that there are many, even in the Quran, it talks about in chapter 49, verse 13, it talks about God created human beings from different tribes and communities. But the whole idea of these tribes and communities is not to oppress one another, but instead to get to know one another. You need to bank in on their strength as opposed to finding the differences and trying to widen it. That's not the whole idea. Okay, so this translates into mutual cooperations and a sense of belonging and also ownership as the essence. So as we live together, we have a common camaraderie. We have a common goal that we wish to achieve. And this is where you will find that about giving space and understanding between the majority, the minority citizens, pertaining to their rights and needs in areas of faith and other circumstances. We need to be very empathetic to their needs. We not only need to be tolerant, but we need to really understand, and then we need to move forward and not just on the surface, right? And that takes another trait, which is unbiasedness. Okay, so just because we are the majority or we are the minority or we are the ruling party, it doesn't give us the rights to dictate or certain things on the less voiced out of the community. And finally, the third one is about wisdom. And I think wisdom is about doing the right thing at the right time with the right tools, even if it's an unprecedented move. And that can only be done by knowing the ground. You will find that the Prophet, after migrating, after facing persecution, the first thing that he did was to have a charter with those people who might take the opportunity to go against it, but he do so in a good faith. He make that step. And sometimes in wisdom, you say in today's time, you'll find that any political individual who were to do certain things, they will receive praises on one group and backlash on the other group, from any parties, from any backgrounds. And this is where you will find that sometimes in doing certain things, we need to not only have the right intention, but also use the right tools that can be accepted by the community, and especially at a time when they are able to accept it. And I think a good model is in the city that we live in. Whenever we talk about an ideal country, especially about interreligious community, one of those that's up there is actually Singapore. And I'm proud to say that.
I mean, I really like the point on unbiasedness and wisdom. I think that itself is something that, especially in the interfaith scene, the more I'm participating in it and the more I'm seeing events and all that unfold, I really feel that success as a sum of concentrated efforts is really beautifully linked to this concept of unbiasedness and wisdom that has been practiced not just by like the religious leaders or leaders of like the different denominations and stuff, but also the participants, the main communities that are actually willing to come together and understand that there is a greater thing that we should come to achieve. In this case, love, peace, joy, and harmony. Also values that are talked about in the book, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. But essentially, when we talk about interfaith harmony or coming together to achieve success, I really feel that it is the sum of efforts of all these different stakeholders who have been willing to sometimes challenge and question even their own assumptions, or even speak out against different denominations who might not have been very forthcoming with wanting to engage in peace and stuff. And I think that really itself is a hallmark of success, to be able to realize that there are far more beautiful things that we can all come and achieve together, instead of trying to push one school of thought over the other. Yeah, at least in the interface. Yeah.
Exactly right. And I really love the point that, even in this conversation, we are trying to find the common points and not only just be at peace with it. And it's just like, okay, that's it. We just have these points and then we interpret it in our own ways, but actually also moving forward. So actually this platform by itself is an actual fruit of that kind of realizations.
Thank you for your reflection, Raj. I think that was really refreshing to be able to to rethink again, to revisit our ideas of what does it mean to be unbiased. Because if you look at the nature of as a human no one wants to admit that they are biased, despite of having, you know, a certain amount of whether a conscious or unconscious bias, either in their reaction or in the way they speak. So I guess we are still in the process of a continuous learning about how to deal with this, because it takes a lot of courage and humility to rethink about your own biasness, I would say, and perhaps to have a more open conversation if this is the way I think, why I feel it that way, and then how you can also mutually accept if, let's say, some people, when they listen to you and say, but I disagree in the way you see things, how can we be humble in accepting that differences? So I thought, yeah, it's a very good point that you mentioned.
It's also relating to the second gem that I wanted to share from this book.
Mm.
It's about tending the garden of the mind. So there's this very beautiful metaphor used by Julian, the monk. So he uses this very beautiful metaphor of how our mind itself is a garden. It's a very small, peaceful space, only accessible to us. And the more we engage in life and accumulate negativity, the more weeds start to grow in our mind. And what happens is it starts to destroy the creepers and plants of love, abundance, and joy that we have been trying to harvest and cultivate for so long. So I think bringing this back, what are the weeds that exist in our mind? It is our prejudice, our discrimination, our sense of, as you said, not wanting to counter the narratives that we might have learned and to just simply stick to our school of thought, etc. So I find, at least from my own Hindu perspective on this, I would call it as Sanatan Dharma. So Sanatan Dharma actually teaches us that ultimately we as individuals are souls moving on the journey of life, wherein this material world is one out of many aspects of life. So while we are here, of course, we should focus on doing our best, bringing about the most welfare for society, for communities around us. And ultimately, how this can actually really be done is for us to first question, what are all these negativities, these little weeds of prejudice, of guilt, of hatred, of stereotypes that we have kind of cultivated along the way for others. And I feel, this also impairs our policy making abilities, at least for me, because of my background in public policy. I feel that, if we are to actually innovate solutions to help others, we must be very wary of all these little bits of prejudice and discrimination that might be existing within the garden of our mind, because it can impair the framing that we an ability of ours to actually look at issues in the context that they deserve.
Oh, I think that was really beautiful. Personally, if you talk about the idea of the minds, especially now in the digital age, people just, it's so easy for you to speak your mind through the keyboards. You don't really care about what are the consequences sometimes. You just think that I have the rights to speak, I have the right to write. If you have any issues with what I say, that's the way you decode it. It's not so much of my issue. But the way you put it, this guard of the mind, I find it like very beautiful, because it shows you that, whatever that you do, you react, you think, you have to see that mind is a very precious component, that if you grow the right, the right plants, put it the right fragrance, then it also affects the whole body system. Whether eventually you would always want to see things in a positive way, or you will always be naturally attracted to a more things that trigger negative, negative remarks, or start to take everything, you take it negatively. Yeah, so I thought that was a very beautiful thing. So if you start to feel that you just want to be more angst, or be more aggressive toward things, but if you reflect back again this advice about, put your mind as this, this tender of gardens of the mind, that would sort of help you, like, okay, perhaps I just want to retract, slow back from, wanting to be nasty to other persons, because eventually it's not so much about the person, it actually affects you, your whole character and your whole spiritual soul in it. Yeah, so I thought that was very beautiful. My last question that I have for you guys, because earlier Ustad Khalid mentioned about this character, that it is very important for a leader to respond and not react. But I think this is a concept that is very useful not only to leaders, but also, to people at large, because On a day-to-day basis, we are always managing human communications, our bonding with other peoples. So my question to you is that if you look at the current situation that we are living in, it is also very difficult for you to control information or control on how people want to understand or perceive your messages online because of the pandemic. A lot of people communicate online. My question, yes, again, what would be the ideal way of practicing that respond versus react in times of this digital age?
I think I need to thank Brother Raj for the last point that he really mentioned. I think I love this, tending the gardens of the mind. This is really beautiful. In my mind now, I'm going to tend that garden because it is a beautiful concept, right? Now I remember there's a saying, "Hurriyatul mar'i mahdudun bi hurriyati ghairi." It means that the freedom of an individual is limited to the freedom of another. So in true sense, there is not much true freedom, because if there's in the whole essence of true freedom, then you might take whatever that's not rightfully yours, right? So in terms of in today's time, when we are trying to have all kinds of informations out there, then I think we can use these acronyms to, that's going to be quite useful, which is think. T would be, is it truthful? Whatever that you're going to take in, and whatever that you are going to put out there, that if you accept things that are good, then you will only produce something that is also of a good value as well, right? Second, is it helpful? Because sometimes it may be truthful, but is it going to help others? If it's not going to help others, it's going to make the matters even worse, then I think it's not useful for us to comment, or it's not useful for us to post it out there. Third, we'll find that, is it important, right? So sometimes we find that, this is things that doesn't really have any impact on anything, and we need to put our attention to something that is much more useful and worth it. And would be, is it necessary? Okay, and as we know, whether the levels of necessity, then we are able to respond correctly. And lastly, K is about being kind. So no matter how we understand the whole concept that we've gone through just now, but how do we put across it to others in a kind manner? And this is where I think empathy really plays a strong play in this.
Wow, thank you, Ustad. I was very impressed that you can come out that with just a few seconds after my question.
It's actually something that I recall, and I just searched on the internet because I saw the poster before.
But the fact that you recall it, it shows that, it's something very impactful to you.
I think really it just comes back down to empathy, and it comes back down to firstly understanding that different demographics of people within the community itself may have different lenses of viewing particular problems. And what happens in the process sometimes is that the context itself plays a very big way in how people perceive certain issues and whether they might want to even frame things as a problem or not. So, like, when we talk about maybe race issues or religious issues in Singapore and all that, often we forget the sociological perspective of wanting to understand why is it that certain power structures or certain communities face inequality or marginalization per se, or that sort of oppression. Why is it that such issues are existing? So instead of taking that third person approach of wanting to genuinely understand why is it that someone says they are having a problem, from a particular community, instead of wanting to understand that, we often are reactionary, and we like to actually just push and say that, how can you be saying you are oppressed? Look at our environment, it's all okay, that kind of thing. So we fail to realize that oppression can happen in like multiple forms. So by not wanting to engage in that other perspective, by not wanting to engage in deeper understanding, we do ourselves a disservice by not genuinely understanding the plight of other human beings, and of course depriving ourselves of the opportunity of wanting to help them as per our capacity. After all, I mean, if we do want to succeed as a society, we should be looking out for our fellow men, for our fellow people, and seeing, how we can best bring benefits for them. And ultimately, one quote that really resonates for me at this point of time is to understand that, at least from a religious perspective, everything that happens is by the grace of God. But with God's effort, we must also put in our own efforts. to achieve certain successes. So this quote that I'm thinking from is actually from Srimad Bhagavatam. The quote is Tatte nukampam susamikshamanu bhunjanma evatma kritam vipakam hridvag vapur bhir vidadhan namaste jivetayo mukti pade sadaya bhav. That, O Lord, whoever sees every situation in life as merely a product of your mercy, of your grace, of seeing even your grace in bad things that are happening, for that person, attaining you becomes very easy. So I think, I mean, of course, when we come together for like interfaith efforts and advocacy, we may have our own conceptions of spirituality, of what God and religion is. But when we come back together, what are we trying to achieve? We are trying to achieve that love, that grace, that harmony that is so vital, for the survival of our society, and at the same time for the empowerment of others in our society. So when we are able to take on that particular lens, as Ustaz Khalid has very beautifully mentioned, that THINK framework, when we are able to apply that and also apply a sense of genuinely seeking understanding, genuinely wanting to help things be better, genuinely wanting to engage in discussions, and genuinely facing our own garden and seeing whether there are any weeds hidden within, only then can we be able to truly work together collaboratively, maturely, and to place the things worth seeking ahead and work together towards achieving them.
Thank you so much. I don't think I can do justice in reiterating, the message that you have construct beautifully. But what I've learned from you is also about this idea of really genuinely trying to understand people. And I think that it's a very good point for us to reflect, because human nature, it's so easy for us to sometimes forget when we are in a very privileged position. And it can also be a struggle for you to understand the difficulties of other people, to move on or to make changes because you are not in their shoes.
I think it's actually quite apt, whatever that Raksha has mentioned just now, with regards to not only should we just seek to understand, but we need to seek to understand so as we would be able to move together. It's about cooperation that will lead towards an action. Okay, and then again, that's the whole concept. That's how I think all of us would actually agree. The whole concept of empathy is about walking the talk, walking along for a common good. Though we may have different opinions sometimes or different approaches, but it doesn't mean that we are unable to gather our strengths together and work for the common good. And I find that sometimes since we are Singaporeans and we love foods too much, I usually give this kind of parable where I said that just because I might have my own favorite food and Raj might have his own favorite food doesn't mean that we can't eat together. It's like, oh, in that case, food should be banned because we disagree on agreeing to a common food. So I think in diversity itself, there's unity.
I think there's also a very critical need to not imposing our particular narratives on other people and communities that we are addressing. So I mean, a lot of individuals might they want to, is it really understanding, or is it just trying to fit in that particular narrative and find evidence to kind of challenge things. So apart from that, sometimes when they are seeking to understand per se, they might actually just be trying to use it as a way of imposing their narratives on a
Justifying their own actions.
Yes, yes, and I find that problematic as well, because as much as we should have our own views, our own value system, that is ultimately what we celebrate as diversity, right? So we should have our own values, but in the greater scheme of things, are we keeping or are we cultivating our values as a means of trying to impose it on someone else? I think that is a particular problematic issue that we should always be very conscious of in our dealings with others, not just in interfaith advocacy or stuff, but even in every aspect of our life. And I think that would itself make a very big difference in the way that we perceive of the problems that are highlighted of like minorities. I will be honest here. Sometimes, when minority communities say that they feel a particular form of oppression or discrimination, I've also seen a lot of comments or stuff on social media, that they say that, oh, is simple, like why must you get so worked up? It's just a joke, that kind of thing. So there's this minimalization, or there's kind of like putting down the plight or the issues that are highlighted of other communities, and I think we should be like very wary of that sense of wanting to just dismiss any other community saying that they are facing a particular issue. So that is where the empathy really comes, and that and also the need to be very conscious of how we are communicating a particular message.
Thank you so much, Raj. Yeah, I think that's a very, no, a very important point. Beautifully, and based on what you have mentioned and the whole discussion, I'm hoping that this can be a stepping stone for us to not just think critically, but also think genuinely, revisit our intention, revisit our ideas about collaborating or like working together with the other, and not so much about I can help you create the change because you deserve this because I am capable to help you that changes. It has to be like, hand in hand.
A few moments later.
Thank you, everyone. I think it has been a very fruitful discussion, and I would like to echo the message that was shared by Ustaz Khalid. Walking along for common good, it's something that we want to take out of this whole conversation, and hopefully it's just a stepping stone towards a more meaningful discussion and also an in-action plan or activity that we can do in the longer run. So I thank Ustaz Khalid and also Raj for joining me today and share your beautiful reflections. But before we end the session today, so I would like to encourage everyone to keep a lookout on the next episode of Singaporeans.